why don't you start off by just telling us a little bit about, where it all begins for you, where you're from and your background.
So I live in Indiana in the United States. I grew up in a relatively small town, super rural. My parents are actually from New York, around Buffalo area, and they moved to Indiana a few years before I was born. So I was very isolated from my extended family, my cousins. When I was younger, I kind of immediately knew that there were some issues in my family. We were never a happy family. We were always arguing, always having some sort of tension, and I was a big problem. I have sensory issues, and so my mother would force me to wear clothing that she wanted me to look cute in and that sort of thing. And I would have meltdowns because I would be overstimulated. They were uncomfortable. I would have be crying, having meltdowns because my tags and my clothes. And I would get spanked or punished physically for being overstimulated and that sort of thing. And I think that shaped the way that I viewed the subsequent issues that arose in my home.
So, was it just you were the only child, or do you have any siblings?
I have a younger brother. He is 2 years younger than me, so I'm 26. My brother is 24. Like, we don't have a very close relationship nowadays. We never really did. The way that my parents handled him versus the way that my parents handled my brother were vastly different. And so it led to two completely different experiences. And it's just, I don't hate him. I don't wish any harm on him. It's just, as him being a safe person for me, he's not going to ever be able to achieve that position, I don't believe.
Do you feel like a lot of this is kind of like owed to your parents for why, you both don't really get along? Like you were kind of pitted against each other in a sense, the way just they treated the both of you?
100%. The expectations of my mother were much more strict on me. The way that when she was pregnant with my brother, she had told my dad that if she was to have another girl, that she would have an abortion. She did not want two girls. She did not want two boys. And I was the first one, so I was fine. But my brother was the one that she wanted, right? It was the one that she got. And I think that kind of followed us through childhood. And so my brother kind of became the golden child, and I became the scapegoat. So my brother, at a very young age, would take advantage of it. If he did something wrong, I would get blamed for it because he knew that my mother would never question him. And so I kind of became, that person that took the fall of every action and, all issues within the family. So it was definitely pretty difficult, and definitely my mom's fault for the structure that she had in her family.
What was your dad's role through all of this? Was he aware of what was happening?
Aware is a relative term, because he was being conditioned to the same thing. He would go to work. He was the breadwinner. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. And so he would go to work, and he is very successful in what he does, but he's a workaholic. So he would get home, 6, 7 o'clock in the evening, and he would immediately be presented with all of the problems that my brother and I had caused. So if I was upset about something, or if I was questioning something, or if I was, upset about something, which was very often for me, because I was like, this isn't right. I know that what's going on isn't right. And so I would fight back. And my dad's coming home after working, for 10 hours a day, and he's being presented with issues. If he didn't solve them on my end, my mother would abuse him. So it was like, if he didn't come and say, hey, Kalissa, please will you just get over it? I'll buy you a milkshake, or, less severe circumstances. Or, what can I do for you to have you drop this issue? Because if I didn't drop the issue, my mother would create a worse one. So his perspective now is adults, and now that we're all out of the house, he understands that what was going on was wrong. But when you're conditioned to that much abuse, there is no ability to understand necessarily right and wrong. So.
Right. And growing up, did you feel that your dad also was not a person that you could feel kind of safe around because of the way that your mom would present things Or did you feel like, okay, at least dad is somewhat of a soft landing for me?
It was kind of both. There was definitely circumstances, and if I needed some, him and I are the same person, ironically. Same taste in music, same personality, same rationality of our brains. So I would, go to him if I needed to like think through my thoughts. I would go to him, but he would not solve my problems. I never went to him expecting that he was going to help me solve something. It was more so I understood at a young age that I emotionally had to regulate myself. And by talking my way through my own thoughts and kind of like having him be a backboard, I'd tell him and he'd basically just be there to listen. That was super helpful. But as far as, actually getting something and actually winning something or actually receiving, basic care as a child, I wasn't going to get that.
What effects do you think this kind of had on you later on and now even?
I am, I'm not a hopeful person. I'm optimistic. I see being hopeful and I don't mean, this is going to sound harsh, but I don't mean it as harshly as it comes across, but I think it's delusional because you're going off of basic things that you don't know, too many things that you don't know. You have a goal, right? You can be
Yeah.
hopeful to achieve this. But I think that, like, for me, in the way that all of my story has kind of congregated together, I have to look at the facts and I can choose to be optimistic even if I know there's a negative outcome. I don't hope, I don't have the ability, because if I hope, I get my hopes up, and, every single time throughout my entire life, they've been destroyed. But it's making that choice to still be positive, and make the decision and the choice to be optimistic. But hopefulness, I don't have. I don't, for me, and this isn't applicable to other people, but for me, it's not realistic and it leads to really negative mental issues, dealing with the consequences if that thing that you hope for doesn't work out.
Right.
I also, for me and my experiences, I've kind of done life alone. It affected my ability to have friends as a child. So I was kind of alone and being hopeful and, hope oftentimes relies on a series of things happening. And all of those series of things are never not dependent on other people. So it's more so a lack of being able to depend on other people or have people I can depend on.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, can you talk to me a little bit more about your situation at home? So,
Yes.
you mentioned the relationship aspect of between you and your family. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the physical home. So,
Yeah. So
tell me a little bit.
I mentioned earlier at the beginning that my mom would like to dress me in outfits, and this was more so than just what I wore to school. This was a sacrificial practice. Every holiday, I'm talking Easter, birthdays, Valentine's Day, Christmas, Halloween, every one of the major holidays, there would be a series of, I don't know, 5 to 7 outfits that she would pick out, themed outfits. And she would take pictures in these outfits. And that was really the first sign to me that there was a massive problem because those outfits would never be worn again. We would literally, I would stand, I would take pictures. Sometimes we'd go out to a park and take pictures. We would take the pictures and then it would just get stored in the house. Never sold, never gotten rid of, never anything like that. And when you have the amount of things that my mother was buying, that stuff multiplies very, very
Collects.
quickly. So I was probably about 4. My brother moved into what was my room at the time, and that's how he remained because she had filled up his bedroom. He was in a crib, and she had basically filled up his bedroom. So when he was, when he graduated from a crib and was in a little boy bed, there wasn't space for one. So he moved into my room. It was a large room. It wasn't, cramped or anything like that. But we didn't have closets. My mother had stuff in the closets. I threw my all of the clothes that I had, and I would intentionally like not ask for clothes because I didn't have anywhere to put them. So I probably had like 5 or 6 t-shirts and three or four pairs of pants that lasted me like all of high school, because I didn't want anything else, because my storage place was a storage container outside of the bathroom. I didn't have anywhere to hang them up. I didn't have anywhere to like lay them down. And I was like, well, I'll just put them here. There wasn't a drawer I could put them into, anything like that. And that's kind of followed me into adulthood as well, where I'm very minimalistic, not attached to anything, not sentimental. I'm somebody, my motto is that if it was important, I would remember it. If I don't remember it, it wasn't worth remembering.
Having
You
it.
know, it
Yeah.
wasn't worth keeping. It wasn't worth tracking. It wasn't worth taking a picture.
That's really interesting. So, I think it's one thing sort of like collecting things and sort of like having just a lot of things, but it's another thing sort of not having this concept of like storage space, like, spaces under the bed and, like how can we put it in a way where it's not, all around the house and it's just, put inside in spaces. Yeah. You're saying that this sort of all started when you were already around. So would you say that this was not a non-issue before you kind of came around? Like, have you ever spoken to your dad about it? Like, how was it before that when they were living in New York and stuff?
So my mother, she was kind of an accidental child, and understanding her childhood, I'll touch on that real quick because I think it's important. She was an accidental child, so she's like 10 years younger than her sister and 12 years younger than her brother. And her parents didn't want to deal with her. It was like, I have this kid. I don't want to deal with her. So they would go on vacations. Her dad was a pastor, so they would go on, church trips or church related trips, and they'd leave her at home. They basically abandoned her. And I
Wow.
think that she has secondary issues that were very noticeable early on. So it was the fact that they didn't want another kid added on to the fact that now they have a kid that they didn't want that has issues that they don't know how to deal with. Because I mean that was the time back in the, you know, 80s. Our understanding of mental health was not there. So even if they did go and try to seek help for her, there wouldn't be any place to seek help. And so they just kind of abandoned her and would push her off onto friends and send her on church camps over the summer. And to kind of adhere to and make her happy, they would throw money at her. If she needed something, they'd throw money. If she asked for something, they'd throw money. I remember my dad said that when she was in college, they would give her like 3 grand every 3 or 4 months just to buy clothes. And in today's money, this is the 90s. In today's
Yeah.
money, that's probably, I don't know, five, six, seven,
Yeah, that's
$8,000,
a lot of
just
money.
because they wanted her to shut up. Because she would just, and if she didn't get what she wanted, she would just complain even more, and then she would get it. And she's still like that today.
So that makes sense now. It's all kind of coming together. Why and how. Like maybe she turned to materialistic things, clothes and all of that, just to kind of fill in that kind of void of, that lack of support and love that she needed as a kid growing up. So in terms of with her marriage as well, how did that sort of manifest? Like, I know you mentioned that she was like that with her husband as well, your father. Just talk to me
She
a little
was
bit more.
very manipulative. This is something that my dad has communicated to me. She is somebody that if she wants something, she has a desire for something, that's the only time that she will ever be nice to you. She will never be nice just to be nice. It's always that she wants something. And so, getting married and her wanting to get married and her wanting kids, because she always had those desires, things weren't really that bad. Now, there were some issues, but the issues were not, looking back, 30 years later, looking back, it's like, oh, yeah, there were big problems. But at the time, you're like, oh, this is just normal relationship stuff. This was the first long-term relationship that my dad had been in. So you don't know what it's going to be like. And, my dad was somebody who was very insecure, and my mother took advantage of that, and exploited that. My dad didn't want kids. My mom did. My dad now has 2 kids. Very manipulative. She'll give you what you want when she wants
When
something.
she wants something.
And so when she had the hoarding, that wasn't as bad as when she had me. After she had me, it went from very little to, oh my God, because there's so many things that you can buy for a baby, right? There's
Mm.
clothes and there's toys and there's all of this stuff. And I think that she had this idea of what she wanted, but never took into account who I actually was. And that kind of created this spiraling, unending, cycle of just hoarding everything that she possibly can.
I'm curious. So, like, okay, would this term hoarding, hoarders, can an individual be diagnosed with this? Is this a mental health issue? Like,
So that's actually OCD. I think OCD is one of the most interesting forms of mental health issues because it can go on both ends of the spectrum. You can have somebody who is obsessed with germs, obsessed with cleaning, like won't shake
right?
hands,
Yeah.
like super clean. And then you can have people like my mom who clean doesn't exist. Organization doesn't exist. My mother, the issue with hoarding and my mother is the fact that there's no organization. If you have a collection of things, you display them. They're organized. You want to be able to see your collection. My mother just wants stuff. So all of it just gets thrown into a pile. There's no organization. There's no desire to actually know what you have or display what you have. And yeah, it's a really interesting thing. But yes, it is tied to OCD
Right.
specifically.
And does this form of OCD, can it or does it mostly manifest for people with, along with other kinds of, mental health issues? But does it generally come together with something else or can it just be a standalone thing?
I think it could be a standalone thing, depending on how you look at it. OCD is just an extreme anxiety disorder. So if you classified anxiety separate from OCD, that those two things would be comorbidities.
What about addiction? Like a shopping addiction or a person who's just unable to control impulse in terms of with that?
100%. 100%. My mother is somebody, my dad and I will joke about how she acts like a toddler when you take her out in public. She doesn't pay attention to her surroundings. The number of times that you have to like move her out of the way because she doesn't
Notice.
take into account those things. She's just it's hard to say that she's selfish because in so many ways her mind never developed beyond a child, and to like put an adult perspective and an adult judgment onto a child, I wouldn't do it to an actual child. So I find it very difficult to put certain judgments upon her such as that.
Now, I know that there are tiers, there are levels to being a hoarder. Can you walk me through those?
Yeah, so level one is you just have like it's cluttered, right? I would say levels like one through three are different levels of clutter. And I think everyone has their own definition of what clutter is, but it's not anything that's going to impede your life in any way. It's not anything it's just dirty. It's going to take you an hour or, a couple days to clean it up. Level four is where it starts to get pretty severe. That is where you start to have stacks of stuff. You're not storing it in storage containers. You're not, you have no place to display it. It's just kind of evolving on the edges of pathways. And level five is basically floor to ceiling stuff. Um, there's sometimes pathways. A lot of times, like in my mother's situation, you step on stuff. There's no clear pathway anymore to get, from point A to point B. You do have to step on stuff. And my dad and I, one of the things that we ensure is that her plumbing, her electricity, her all of those things that she would need to live in that house, that they stay relatively maintained because you can't have somebody come in and do those things that it's not accessible. And no person should have to live in a house if it can be helped, where they don't have plumbing or they don't have water or they don't have electricity. She's a person with mental illness and, she's negatively impacted me, but she's defined by her mental illness. She's not aware of all of the ways in which she's hurt me. She's not aware of all of the ways in which she's hurt my brother or my dad. So we do what we can to just make sure she has those things. But yeah, if not, it would be, I don't even think you'd be able to get into the house if it wasn't for us just coming in and doing like your basic maintenance.
Talk to me about hygiene in this situation. How does that work?
The showers and toilets and that sort of thing, they don't get cleaned very often, if at all. My mother, because of her narcissism, though, she presents incredibly well. So, unlike a typical hoarder who kind of they kind of put their hygiene in, the second place, hers is still number one. She finds a way, I don't know how, but she finds a way in her bathroom to like do her hair, her makeup. She naturally has curly hair, and she will not leave the house if her hair is not straight. She will not leave the house if she does not dye her hair blonde. She's so meticulous about the way that she looks out in public,
Wow.
and defends that. And that's kind of different from other hoarders because a lot of hoarders are just very, you can see it. They have no shame over the condition of their house. My mother is very protective of her house.
So
Very.
if your mom was to walk out now and go out with like a group of friends or with, at a social event or something, no one would be able to tell that her condition of her house is like that.
No. No, I mean, my mom, she now works as a teacher's aide, so she has a job. She goes and she spends time with kids every day. The kids love her. I think if they're not her kids, she's a positive thing or a positive influence for them, which I love. But yeah, you would never know. And yeah, she's very protective of her house. She doesn't like people coming up to the doors, doesn't like, you know, that we have a porch in the house. We have a porch and then we have a side door where the driveway is. She's blocked off the porch from delivery drivers putting them up there because there's windows. And like, yes, there's blinds and stuff, but it's the risk that there's a possibility they could look inside and they could see what the reality of her facade is.
It's really fascinating because like she's fully aware that this is, that this is an issue because she's obviously covering the windows and making sure people are not getting in. She doesn't want anyone to look in, so she knows it's an issue, yet she doesn't acknowledge that it's an issue enough to be able to do something about it.
Yep.
And
that's incredibly frustrating, like as a child. And somebody, like, I was very aware of it. I've always been a question asker. So I'd be like, do they make you wear a bunch of outfits and take pictures? And they're like, no, that's crazy. And I'm like, okay, I knew I didn't like this and I didn't think it was normal. I was very young. I would say probably 5 or 6 years old when I was fully aware that the situation that I was in was 100% wrong. I didn't ask, oddly, I never asked about the house. I never asked about, hey, like, does your parents, like, not allow you to have your own closets? It was probably because of her conditioning and manipulation that I can't remember, but I knew that the boundary was the house. I knew that there were certain things that I couldn't talk about or ask about or anything like that. But I asked, so I was very aware. And that led me to being more of a problematic child because if you tried to do something, I was going to be like, no, that's not,
right.
that's not right,
Yeah.
Going back to my clothes and throwing them over the storage container. I wanted a closet and my parents would not give me one of the closets. And they were like large closets too. And my mother would not agree. And my dad was like, well, what if we got you like one of those, temporary closets, mobile closets? And I was like, no, I want the closet. I already share a room with my brother. I'm just asking for a closet. Like, I don't even have a room that is my own. I don't even have a space that is my own. All I'm asking for is a closet. That's the only thing in this house that I'm asking to be mine. And I'm not a temporary closet doesn't cut it. I knew that I shouldn't have had to share a room with my brother. We had a third bedroom. I wouldn't care about doing it if it were a money issue or if it were, a size issue. Maybe we didn't have another room, but it was the fact that there was another option and I was forced to share a room with my brother because of her hoarding. And I never got the closet. I graduated college and went off to college. and never got that closet.
Do you reckon that also maybe one of the reasons for why you didn't feel like talking about it to other people was because everyone in your house was kind of mutually living in this kind of condition and no one was really, I mean, people were mentioning it, maybe your brother, your dad, but not really making a big enough deal about it. So you were thinking to an extent, maybe this is also somewhat normal, or were you fully aware that, like when you would go to a friend's house, for example, and see how the condition of their house was, would you kind of like question it and be like, oh, like, is this what it's supposed to be like? Like,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah. And those, in addition to asking questions, you have those experiences. And, you go over to a handful of girls' houses and their houses are clean. And their parents, allow them to, and like rules and parental rules. I understood that that's perspectives. Everyone else, but like that they would have their own room where they could, close their door. And every girl that I went over to their house, that's what they had. Those types of experiences early on, I became very embarrassed of the house, probably to the same level as my mother. I played travel soccer when I was in high school. I used to hate that because we would carpool over to practice together because it was about an hour away. And I hated being dropped off because I knew that if they could see when I opened up the door, that my mom's stuff was right there, right as soon as I opened the door, and I would get dropped off at night. So you have the light coming in, it would be illuminated. It was very embarrassing, and I would get so much anxiety, like, oh, please, because they would make sure I could get into my house before they would leave, and I'm like, please just leave, please just drive away.
Yeah.
I hated it. Of all the
Yeah.
experiences I had when I was a kid, that's probably the experience I hated the most because it was fear that if they saw that and they did something, what's going to happen to me? If they open a CPS investigation, what's going to happen to me? You know what I mean? Like, am I going to go into, protective
Right.
care? So yeah, it was incredibly terrifying, incredibly terrifying.
At that point, did you know that would be a possibility, like being called to CPS and them doing like a check?
My mother, I do know to a certain extent, every once in a while, she would kind of talk very negatively about CPS. A little bit of fear mongering, like, oh, like
Yeah.
these kids, aren't taken care of, or these kids, like you won't even be able to get clothes. And my mother was very fearful about me calling because I would be
Right.
the one to do it. But there was enough doubt where I'm like, I don't know if this would be the better option.
So, can you tell me, like, in terms of like that concept of cleanliness and that concept of, clearing things and stuff, like, how did that impact you kind of growing up? Did you have a concept of that for yourself, or were you kind of,
No, there was never an ability to, because if it was almost as though if I found like a cheat, if I found space, it would get taken away. So, you just kind of accept the reality. But I could never like accept the reality. I was always somebody who was trying to find a better option. So I remember when I was in high school, I was like, okay, I went to my mom and I said, what if we moved like all of the stuff that's in the house and we moved it into that third bedroom? Like, I'll accept the fact I have to, this is 10 years later, but I'm like, I'll accept the fact that I share a room with my brother. I'll even accept the fact that I don't have a closet. Can I have a clean house? I'll give up my own personal space to like have people to where I could have friends over. So yeah, I was like, can we move it into the third house? And that was World War III. That was the worst question that I could have ever asked. She got, incredibly upset about it. So it was like, I was always trying to find ways for things to work in my favor in propositioning those things. And it created more, looking back, it was definitely creating more problems than it was worth. But for me and my sanity, I have to fight. Because if I don't fight, I'll never get anything.
how bad like was it? Can you describe this physically for me?
Yeah, so we had a family room, a living room, a dining room, 3 bedrooms, one of which was a master bedroom. Then there were 2 bedrooms and a bathroom that was in the center of them. My parents' bedroom was filled with stuff all around the bed. So basically, you couldn't even get into the closet, like that was in the, you know. in that room. There was just a mass of stuff. Our living room was completely full. You can get probably about a quarter of the way through the room, but you can't even get to the other side of the room. There's no pathway, there's no anything. It's just stuff everywhere. Our dining room, there's a pathway because it's the cars and where we park is on the other side of the house. So the dining room, the pathway outside of the pathway, there's like a dining room table that I haven't seen. You couldn't see the chairs, you couldn't see the dining room table. I would kick the legs of the table a lot because it would just be a mass of stuff. And if you're, working with a pathway that's, a foot or so wide at 6 o'clock in the morning before you've really been able to wake up, you kick a few tables. Our kitchen was relatively clean, but the sides and the walls of the kitchen were very, very, cluttered. It was like if there was space, there's
It
going to
was
be
gone.
stuff.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, that third bedroom, we used that bathroom, so there was a path. I mean, you can't see the other side of the wall. Like, because it's a fairly decently sized bedroom. You can't see the other side of the wall because of the mass of stuff that she has in between the pathway and the other side of the room. So it's very, very intense. It's literally floor to ceiling stuff.
Did you guys find rodents, cockroaches, bugs, that kind of
Uh,
stuff?
Actually, no. We were pretty lucky. I do know that there was a couple times in which we had a few mice, which happens. That's not an abnormal thing. That's not due to any level of hoarding. It just happens. Sometimes you get a few mice that come in. But we never had a perpetual issue. We never had cockroaches. We never had cockroaches. We never had bed bugs. Bed bugs actually kind of became a epidemic after we were kind of out of the house. We never had lice. My brother and I never had lice, which still to this day, because
Yeah.
if we had it, we would never get rid of it. I would have lice for the rest of the time in which I was living there because you can't
Right.
clean the way you need to clean. Um, and we fortunately somehow never got it. So yeah, I mean, from that perspective, it was kind of crazy that we never no.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of other kids that are in the situation, they do deal with those issues. Thankfully, I never did.
Yeah, that's really lucky. There's one thing like being cluttered and messy and one thing being clean, right? But if it kind of borderline like the mess is just beyond, there's no ability, there's no way that you can even clean, like wipe a surface because there is no surface to wipe. So naturally there would
Yeah.
be dust collection everywhere and there would be, issues of
Mildew,
molding and
mold. Yep, yep,
yeah.
yep. All super bad. I think part of it was is that my mom was not like a I don't throw stuff away like at all or like a laziness issue. It's she just buys a lot of stuff. So it's not if you watch like the show Hoarders, a lot of times you'll see wrappers and
Yeah.
food thing. My mother's not like that. She's very meticulous about making sure that all of those things are out. So our house is incredibly cluttered. I mean, it's a level 5 out of 5, but it's not amassed with food, which I think probably helped to eliminate a mice issue or a cockroach issue specifically. My
Yeah.
mother, she's aware of that. She knows that she has an issue. She just can't solve it.
What would happen if you were to just take something from a pile and chuck it?
It's been done a few times. When I was young and I was angry, I've thrown a few things, I've knocked things over, I've broken things. It depends. I remember like I would knock something over, and if you knock something over by accident, it got treated like you did it intentionally. If you need to be more careful, like you're lying, there's no way, like it's like I tripped over a shoe that was on the floor and I fell into this pile. She's like, how can I be more careful? It wasn't even my shoe.
Yeah.
Um, but she would notice if I like restacked the pile. She would notice. She would notice if something was out of place. She also would like check the trash to make sure that no one was throwing anything away. Um, she never had trust in what I would do specifically, because I would be the person to be like, yeah, I'm going to throw this away. She's not even going to know, you have that much stuff. There's no way you actually care about it.
Yeah.
But you would be surprised with, like, you can take more than I probably think I can, but if I take one thing that's wrong and one thing that she knows, I'm screwed. And she'll figure everything else out.
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's fine until you get caught,
Yeah.
and then you will have to face the consequences for everything that you've done.
Would you like what would happen if you guys asked her like why? Why can't we throw this? Like what's wrong with okay, like why do you want to keep this? What was her reasoning?
That would be an attack on her own insecurity. There is a level of insecurity that she has about the house. And whenever her insecurities are attacked or threatened in some way, she will do the same thing back. So, oh, you're questioning what I'm doing? Well, I can question what you're doing. I can question like how you treat me. I can question what you're doing. You know what I mean? So there was never any rationality,
Right.
reasoning,
Right.
logic.
Would you say like if you went into that house today, you will still find a dress from when you were a child?
When we changed the water heater, we found baby books. And like I said, I'm 26. I'm almost 27, and these are probably from when I was a kid. There's dresses, and we went to Disney World a few times when I was growing up, and there's ungodly amounts of souvenirs. Uh, I mean, my childhood is in that house. Like everything that has ever been bought for me is in that house, which is, a lot of people would be like, oh, like that's got to be so fond memory. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, could you imagine like
Yeah.
everything that you've ever had, everything that's ever been bought for you? You never got rid of any of it. And it's just so, like, you don't place value in those things because there are memories. Yeah, she keeps like the grades. Like back in the day before computers, you would have like your
Yeah.
grades and your papers. All of them still in our house. We have she has folders from when I was in kindergarten, just like regular homework
Yeah.
worksheets.
Can you walk me through, for example, like typically a person may go home from a day of work or school and they're gonna relax, they're gonna like faff about at home, maybe watch a movie or two, take it easy, sit down, do their homework. Like they have that kind of space to move around in their house. What would a day look like for you going home? Like would you guys as a family be able to do that kind of stuff?
No. We did have a TV, but the TV had a couch, and that couch could not, like, only one of the, like, areas of the couch you could have occupancy. And that was really the only place in which you could see the TV. So you couldn't like stand, in another place in the room and watch the TV because there would be stuff. There's literally like, because I went over to change my mother's water heater. There's literally a pile and then like a little dip in the pile so she can sit down on the couch and watch the TV. But if you were sitting like right next to her, you wouldn't be able to see the TV. And that was very much what I grew up with. Um, so this was like before smartphones were really a thing. I had like an iPod Touch, but I couldn't have it in my room. The answer was kind of sports. My brother and I both played soccer, and I played basketball as well. And that was a lifesaver for me, specifically soccer. It was a place where I could get that anger out. All of the things that I couldn't say to her, I could get that frustration out without actually having to say those words. With high school sports, you had practice Monday through Saturday. So I wasn't in the house very often. As far as doing homework, I would do it in my bed. I didn't have like a desk or anything that I could do, or I would do it on the bus. I didn't watch a whole lot of movies because again, there was no place to watch them. No, I lived a very sheltered childhood because of it, but it wasn't because it was intended to be sheltered. It was just more so a byproduct of the capabilities of what I was
Right.
able to do.
Yeah. I mean, I can really imagine it being sort of like, I don't know, 95% of your life is just around this because I mean your home is your haven, right? It's like the center of like you, I guess, right? And so if you can't really feel comfortable going home or you're like, oh, I'm not gonna have space to do anything, well then how much time can you really explore yourself or just do things that people normally would do outside of their house? So
Yeah, and that was the biggest issue when I went to college. I had no idea who I was, because I was always battling. my mother's expectations. You know, because her expectations of me are not in any way, shape, or form even close to how I actually am. And so I went to college and I'm like, I have no idea who I am. I don't even know what characteristics I'm looking for in a friendship because I felt uncomfortable having friends because I was scared that if I got close that they would find out. My adult life has been much more tumultuous. You would feel like, oh, I'm out of the house, like freedom. But it kind of presented with its own set of additional issues on top of that.
Walk me through like leaving this house. So how did that all kind of come about for you? And your dad also is not living with your mom anymore, right?
No,
How did that?
no.
Yeah.
So when I was 18, I went to college. It was very, I did very well in school. And so it was very much the expectation that I go to college. And so I would have gone to community college and saved a little bit of money, but I could not live at home anymore. So I left and I got a dorm for my first year. And then my roommate actually bought a house. So we moved into that house and I was there for several years until, I got a outside job and that sort of thing. Um, I would not have survived if I had had to stay at that point in time. Everyone's getting and finding themselves in their own way, and I needed to do that. It was just a miserable experience because the older you get, the more you realize what you've been conditioned to. My brother, like I said, he's a couple years younger than I am, and he stayed for, I want to say, a year after he graduated. And when he left, my dad left within 6 months later. It was very
Wow.
like because there was nothing left for him. It was the negativity that my mother and I would have, or the negativity that would be directed towards my brother. Those didn't exist anymore. And so all of that negativity and all of those expectations got directed onto my dad. That was the first time where he had to deal with the full expanse of like how toxic and abusive she
Yeah.
actually is.
How would you describe now your dad's apartment and your brother's apartment? Are they quite like you, very minimalistic and just don't want to have any clutter, anything in their house? Yeah, so it's had the same
Yeah,
effect on all of
my
you.
my brother he's much more he can get pretty messy. He's a typical boy, he has, things and, glasses on the table or things like that. But the way that it impacted him was far different. But he wasn't affected to the way that it was like such an aversion to him that he can't be like her, if that makes any sense. So he has to like avoid it. He didn't really have that because it was just he never had problems making friends. He was always staying at other people's houses. Girls are a lot different than boys are.
Yeah.
So it's like girls are like, if I do something for you, you have to do something for me. When guys
Yeah.
are like, yeah, I'll help you out, dude.
Yeah.
Catch me
Right.
later or not. I'll forget about it. They're very lax. Girls are not like that. So just from that aspect, he didn't have the negative impact. But my dad, because my dad actually lives with me now. We live together, and it's been really good. He's very clean, likes to keep things clean, doesn't like to have trash everywhere. Everything has a place. We both like to collect things. My dad likes to play guitar and has a variety of guitars that he likes to collect. And then I have, a variety of, I go through phases, right? Right now it's like Legos. I like to build Legos and that sort of thing. But if I like buy a Lego set and I don't have a place for it, I sell another one. I can't just amass like too much, and I don't ever, I don't ever want to get to that point. But I'm not
Interesting.
somebody who's like, oh, if there's like a glass on the table, then I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to clean it up. So I found what's best for me is to just if I see it, I see it. But I don't let the stress of that overrun me because it very much has in my past where I've been so obsessed with doing anything I could to avoid being like her. And so as an adult, it's like, no, if I make a conscious effort and I know that I'm going to take care of everything in one fell swoop, I can be stressed for those 2 hours or so. The amount of time it
Right.
would take. I can be stressed
Yeah.
during that time, but I'm not going to be stressed the entire week. So yeah,
That's good. I mean, it sounds like you've done a lot of work on yourself, even with that.
I think it's different for me because I tried therapy and stuff. I have a really great therapist now, but I tried therapy early on, and it was just so much stuff that it's so hard to comprehend like the expanse of trauma that I've experienced. I would get really angry because I'm like, you're not listening to me. Like you're trying to go this direction. I need you to go this direction, or I need to address this. And it was just really infuriating. So I kind of thought about myself and I thought about where I wanted to be. But it also, I fully understand that there are negative aspects to it.
Yeah.
You know, but to be where I'm at and to be in exist in a world where I'm happy and I experience happiness and look forward to each and every day and seeing the good and finding the good. That's a place that I never thought that I would be. I didn't think I'd be alive. So
Mm,
no,
yeah.
I'm very proud of myself, and proud of how I've become. But yeah.
What were some of those little epiphanies or those moments, those realizations that you had that kind of helped you steer yourself out of that kind of pain of the trauma and move into a more healthier headspace?
I realized that when I was chasing, or not chasing it, when I was running away from it, I was going directly into what I was avoiding. So, like with the cleaning and like being obsessed with cleaning, if you're so stressed, you can't pay attention to the big picture. You're seeing all of these small little things. And so you end up doing a really terrible job picking up everything because you're so stressed. Like if I don't miss something and you're going back and forth instead of just stepping back and being like, okay, this is everything. You don't have the ability to do that in that state. And because you run from it, that's your instinct is to run away and to seek that freedom and to not do anything. And I think for me, the pivotal healing point was realizing that I can't run from it. This is trauma that I have. This is something that I went through. These are experiences that I have had. This has shaped the way that and who I am as a person. It's so you want to think that no part of you is was forged from that experience. You want to
Mm,
run away from all of it and accepting the fact that, yes, I am a different person by going through those experiences. I have unique aspects of my personality that are because of that experience. And really understanding what those areas were and coming to accept them and find value in them and discover them. And I realized that that was the discovery of myself that I needed so desperately, which was just acknowledging how that really affected me. Instead of, I don't ever want to feel that way again, or I don't want to be anything like that. It's, no,
mm,
I know I'm not going to be like that because in the back of my mind, I'm like that. But how did that situation affect me? In a good way or a bad way? How did that? It's okay if it's bad. That
mm,
such a bad situation. It's expected that there's going to be bad things, and understanding that those negative consequences aren't always as negative as that situation. Like my mother would say, "Oh, like that's selfish," or "Oh, that's," and you realize in your life that isn't. I'm not selfish, or
mm,
like I'm not selfish in that situation. Like, yes, it is selfishness, but when I apply it to the rest of the world and not the environment I came from, that's actually a really good quality to have.
does.
Not running
Yeah.
away, finding and figuring out how I was affected,
Mm,
and learning to love those parts and find them as the most, because those are the things that define my unique experience and my
mm,
unique person. I mean,
yeah.
that's what makes me unique. And, I always say that no person is being better than you.
Mm,
No person is better than being me than me. And those are the things that define me.
yeah.
So
Love
why
that.
not love them? Why not
Yeah.
appreciate them? Why not respect them? Why not, you know,
Yeah. I love that. Would you also say like celebrating those first times as well can be really big? Like the first time you actually had your own closet space, the first time you invited someone over to your house, the first time you made a friend and shared the story with someone, or
Well, I think what's really interesting is that was one of the issues that I had was I'm somebody who likes my space. You know what I mean? Like I'm very particular about my space. I don't like, it's funny. I like going out to spending time with friends and stuff or like going out to the bar, but I want to sleep in my own bed. I'm very particular that if I go out drinking, I will find a way to make it back to my bed, to sleep. I realize that that's something that's very important and I don't have to like necessarily meet societal My experiences are definitely not what I thought they were 5 or 6 years ago when I first got out. It was like, I have to be social because I don't have any friends, and so you go and I hate drinking. I personally, like now, I don't like drinking. I don't like being drunk. I don't like the hangover. I don't like going to a bar. And I've realized that like, I don't need to go to a bar because I need friends, right? I'll go to a bar if I want to, not because I need to. And deciphering those wants and those need versus those needs was the keystone piece. It's like, yes, I will find friends that don't want to go out to the bar. Those people I can have fun with, but they're not going to be friends because I don't want to do that every weekend. And it's not, I don't need, if that's what I need to do to have, I don't need those friends. I'll find other ones.
Yeah. Final plugins, final message, Kalissa, before we end the episode. What would you like to say to our listeners today?
I would just say that, like I said earlier, if you are running away from a version of yourself that you're scared of, you are going to end up being that person that you're scared of. You will end up being the person that you don't want to be. And instead of running away, instead of working with fear, work with confidence. Work to overcome that fear. Don't think about the end goals, right? Don't think about the thing that you're avoiding. Think about the feeling of your fear and come to terms with that. The end goal will change. That will change naturally. The cause is the fear. So if you happen to, get your fear under control, your outcome will naturally be different. And it'll be better because if that's your biggest fear, your outcome will be better. Naturally, it will be better than what your worst fear is. Right. So don't think about the fear and keep reminding yourself of the fear and because you'll draw your mind to making comparisons or analogies to that situation, which drowns your mental health. It really drowns your progress because you're like, oh, well, this happened. That reminds me of this. Don't think back. When you're focusing on yourself, when you have that freedom, when you have that ability to figure out who you are, work on yourself. Those things they're not going to change. Those are your experiences. Figure out how they shaped you. And those ways in which they shaped you, I can 100% guarantee are positive things if you're aware of them. They're only not positive if you're not aware of how those situations affected you.
Calissa, thank you so much for being on Multispective. I really appreciate your vulnerability on air and the insights that you've shared with us today.
Thank you so much. I hope this helps people.
If you enjoyed the episode and would like to help support the show, please follow and subscribe. You can rate and review your feedback on any of our platforms listed in the description. I'd like to recognize our guests who are vulnerable and open to share their life experiences with us. Thank you for showing us we're human. Also, a thank you to our team who worked so hard behind the scenes to make it happen.
Lucas Theory, Stefan Menzel.
The show would be nothing without you. I'm Jenica, host and writer of the show, and you're listening to Multispective.